Good morning, everybody, and welcome to one more edition of our in-service podcast at Service Council. I am Gerardo Pelayo, Vice President of Research and Advisory over here, and we have a very important topic to cover today, turning imperfect data into predictive power. I want to thank Alice Bowen, from Senior Portfolio Manager of Connected Products at Lexmark, for joining us in this important conversation. We'll get to an introduction to you, Alice, in just a second. But first, let me do a little bit of housekeeping and a little bit of why we've been talking about this topic today. So predictive is one of those words that has become too commonplace, and at some point it can lose some of the credibility if we don't understand it, if we don't question why is it that we really want to achieve that. Is it the only way to provide service nowadays? It isn't, I would argue. But with the higher complexity that we see in the install base, in the service contracts, in the expectations from the customers, the expectations from managers, the amount of data that we have, the truth is, if we're not predictive, at best, it's going to take us longer to react to a service event when it's needed. It might take us longer to resolve it once we get there. And it could even lead into situations where a simple fix that could have been caught early now becomes a catastrophic failure, which is more time that the asset is not up and running. It's a worse customer experience. It might be a more expensive situation to resolve for the service provider. So that's all on one side, just on the delivery of the service itself. The other is, well, we could always pre-position a number of resources across the entire install base. That doesn't come free. And so while there are situations when some of these approaches might make sense, unless we have that predictive capability, that trust in the underlying data that allows us to say, this is where we want to be reactive, this is where we want to be proactive and be able to anticipate what's going to happen to deliver that customer experience, then it's a really very different ballgame. So because of that, today we're going to be talking about how do we get there? What is the necessary foundation so that we can build towards that predictive power? Today's podcast, as usual, is going to be recorded, and for our LinkedIn audience, we see you. If you agree, you want to expand on some of these comments, you disagree, have a different perspective, please, we invite you to comment, and we'll do our best to respond either as we're going through this conversation on the chat, or we'll be following up after it as well. So that in terms of housekeeping, without further ado, let me do an introduction of Alice Bowen, or allow you to introduce yourself. You've been a great contributor to our community. We had a fantastic service journey day in April in Lexington, Kentucky, where we were talking about this very same topic. A lot of good ideas that came out of that I'm sure we'll be able to leverage today. So Alice, I know you, love that you're here. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself and our community?
Absolutely. Hi, Gerardo. Thanks for having me. Really pleased to be here today and get to chat with you and the audience. Again, Alice Bowen. I am based out of Lexmark's headquarters here in Lexington, Kentucky, the beautiful bluegrass. And you may see here behind me on the logos and in the advertising for the podcast that, Lexmark is now part of Xerox, which is an exciting change for us, happened early July. And we are really excited for the opportunities it brings for Lexmark and our connected product solution to now be part of the Xerox brand. So we're excited for those growth opportunities ahead. So I've been at Lexmark about 16 years now, and I've moved through roles, started out in our operations organization, managing some of our largest MPS or managed print services customers. So I've been on the front lines of those operations with customers who are interacting with our devices. And then I've moved through roles in our sales, global sales, and strategy organizations over the years. Before Lexmark, had some experiences all the way from small business to the Fortune 500. And here now, today, I am in a role focused on our connected product solution. Now, you may be thinking, Lexmark, you're a printer company, right? And certainly that is our heritage. But you can also think of printers as some of the first IoT and connected devices. So we've been connecting to those assets and harvesting data from them and acting on that data for decades now. And what we've realized over the years is that the platform and the processes that we've developed to do that really apply to manufacturers of all sorts of connected devices, whether it's medical equipment, HVAC units, industrial machinery, restaurant equipment, you name it. If you're a manufacturer of a machine or electromechanical type device that needs to provide field service and help desk support, you're probably all facing some very similar challenges, and we're very familiar with those. So we realized that the platform we developed could help support manufacturers of all sorts of devices. And so we're now managing over 1.5 million devices through that platform today, and helping other manufacturers as well to bring their products onto the platform and be able to achieve some of the business results we'll talk about that Lexmark has been able to achieve.
Nice, nice. And that's a lot of expertise and experience that we're going to be able to leverage in the next 25 minutes, I'm sure. Thank you for that. And one of the things that you talked about, I'll use it as a bridge, because it's that foundation of, okay, I want to move forward. I want to do something, but where do I start? Am I ready for it? And a lot of the conversations that we drive are grounded in our research. We conducted the 2025 State of Artificial Intelligence and Service Technology at the start of the year, and predicting the install base needs at scale, as long with proactively triggering service events that were amongst the most urgent challenges that service leaders wanted to address through technology. And the question that emerged as we look under the hood of, well, how do I actually get there is, first off, do I have the right data? How do I separate the fact that that data doesn't exist within my organization, or it is there, but it is extremely painful to try to consume it, versus when it's ready to be utilized and leveraged for the business?
Yeah.
Any advice?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a journey that we have been on for many years, as I mentioned, and we see it with other clients and customers that we're talking to in the Optra customer base. And really, a lot of those challenges are silos of data, and the fact that data is unstructured, it's messy. Different organizations within your company may be using it for different purposes. There's no common or standardized data model across the enterprise. So really, and then you get to the point of, okay, I have data, but then what do I do with it? So really what we have embarked upon and what we are able to help other customers with is that enterprise data foundation. That is something that is key to any of the predictive service outcomes that we're going to be talking about or trying to achieve, right? The data is the foundation of all of it. And, it's not going to be perfect, but you do have to start with what you have and start to transform that data from that raw, unstructured, messy silos that you have, pulling it together into, data lakes or data lake houses, and really transforming that data from the raw state through, what the industry terms the medallion layers of, moving it from bronze to silver to gold data. That's that fit for use data that folks agree upon as a trusted source of truth. And that's a journey, but it is one that is a worthwhile journey. And it's one that we have been able to achieve ourselves and also support other manufacturers in being able to build that data foundation to get started with their predictive journey.
Yeah, and it is a journey indeed. I would agree with you that most of the organizations are in that middle layer of, they have the data, but they're not able to utilize it effectively. And the interesting thing, as you started to touch on, is also that once you start utilizing it, It helps you determine what is the data that perhaps you need and that you have, but you don't really need, and what is
Mm.
some of the data that you're not collecting right now, and perhaps without a lot of value. So on that note, I remember I had one of my first mentors when I started in industry field wall. He used to say, not all the data matters, but the one that matters a lot.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a great way to summarize how we have to go around this imperfect data conversation. But so, which is the right data under which circumstances? In your experience, have you observed any patterns around how which outcomes are either more or less sensitive to the level of data quality? So if I were to put it in other words, when is it that imperfect data can be valuable?
Yeah. I'm going to share a great example from our own business, and that is our consumables ordering process. So, obviously, in the print industry, consumables are a big driver of profit, and that's true, across many different organizations as well, other than print. One of the problems we encountered was third-party compatible supplies. So, to protect that profit in our business, we need to make sure that our customers are leveraging Lexmark genuine toner. And, if not, that is a challenge to our profitability, but also to the service and use of our devices and them performing in the way that they're intended to perform. And so, several years back, I would say it's probably been 15 or more years ago now, we began using data to automate that supplies delivery process. And that has had a huge impact on our business, from automating the supplies process and making it easier for our customers, reducing manual ordering processes and personnel on our side. Sustainability impacts have been huge. But most importantly for us, locking in that supplies loyalty. But when we got started on this, the data was not perfect, right? This was 15 years ago. We were receiving some basic usage data from our machines and sort of a toner low type alert. And, it was rough, but we were able to get started with that data and start to drive some of those processes of the automated orders. Now, what we found along the way was, we were using, some assumptions across the whole product family. And depending on the usage of that device, the toner might be delivered too early if it was a low usage device, or it might be delivered too late if it was a high usage device. So over the years, we were able to evolve both not only our technology, but also our data collection, to add more sensor technology, more telemetry to both the devices and the supplies themselves, to help us better understand the usage of those products. So having more detailed information about the level of supplies in the device helped us to hone in that delivery, right? And then now with the machine learning algorithms and AI capabilities that we have, we've evolved that to even more sophisticated algorithms that take that individual printer's usage patterns and print behavior and try to predict at a device level when's the right time to ship those supplies. So it's been a constantly evolving process, not perfect to begin with, but getting started with it really helped us learn and grow and evolve that process, even connected back with our R&D team, right, to help evolve the technology itself. So it's a phased iterative approach. It doesn't happen overnight, but you do have to start using that data, as you said, to figure out, what do I need, what do I not need, and how do I get better at this?
Yeah, no, that's a great example. Thank you. And part of that story, I might be there's the qualitative and the willingness to do it, the change management that you've addressed.
Mm-hmm.
The other part is there's some metadata
Mm-hmm.
or the understanding, just to be consistent, uh, are we using data to determine what is the quality of data that we currently have?
Mm-hmm.
And this can be a very exhausting
Yeah.
process, and it can take forever if we do long-term data quality assessment. We saw that it's an issue. It is a roadblock. In that same survey that I was referring to earlier on AI and technology, almost a third of service leaders called out an insufficient digital data foundation as the main roadblock to scale their current efforts. So it is slowing down at best all these possibilities for innovation. And the question that I have for you is, what experience, what advice do you have for overcoming this fear, put together like a structured approach to determine what is the level of data readiness that an organization has so that they can elevate that predictive
Mhm.
service maturity that they are looking for?
Yeah. It's you make a really good distinction between the data quality and the data maturity, right? Because we talked about quality and getting that up to speed, but then there is a continuum of maturity when it comes to predictive, right? Is you
Hmm.
start at the reactive end and you're potentially able to move towards a more proactive model. We did this in our service process and our consumables process as well. Uh, and then stepping into more and more predictive capabilities as your data matures and as your products mature. But one key point there is there's value all along that continuum, right? Just simply moving from reactive to proactively responding to alerts has value. And then as you are able to achieve more and more telemetry data or other data that supplements those use cases, then you can continue to move along that predictive journey and that predictive path to add more value. But it also doesn't mean you stop doing the basic steps either.
Hmm.
So you continue with those and you build on those because they continue to have value. I would go back to our devices and back when we were first starting on this journey and moving towards a more proactive method in our service process, we did start responding to device error codes and device alerts. But at that point, you know something's already happened. The customer's already had an experience that is not ideal with your product once you get an alert. So over the years, we were able to engineer that additional sensor and telemetry data into our products, some of them now having over 100 sensors in a device. And that gives us additional data about the health of the device, the temperature, vibration, all sorts of other data coming from those sensors at a component level that then help us now also with the additional
Hmm.
availability of AI and ML technology to really better truly predict and read the signals in the data to predict those next actions and get ahead of the issues before the device failure and before the customer experience has been impacted. Now, you talked about it being an exhaustive effort. It is, and that's where I would say you can try to do it yourself if you have the resources in house. Some companies do. It can be, as we mentioned before, trial and error. It takes a long time. It's taken us decades. What we do offer our customers with the Optra platform and our connected product solution is a predictive service maturity assessment where since we've been through this journey ourselves, we know sort of what data points are required to get to certain use cases like predictive service or a proactive methodology. So we can look at the data points pretty quickly. This is a pretty quick exercise and just see where on that scale should you be able to achieve. Now, the next step would be more detailed data science and assessment, but at least do you have the data points to get to proactive or predictive or prescriptive even? So, that's something that we do offer. And I think that reaching out to an expert who has been on that journey themselves and might be able to help you accelerate past some of that iterative effort could be really beneficial in getting there faster.
Yeah, that's a very valuable approach. I mean, the whole concept of baselining and benchmarking is very much at the core of our philosophy to becoming
Mhm.
better and advancing the maturity of the service industry of our members as a whole. So that assessment to know where you are through a systematic process, I would say it's a huge win. And since we're talking about maturity assessments, so we have within Service Council developed an assessment to see the readiness of organizations to deliver on what we call a holistic service experience, the customer experience, the frontline experience, and the business experience. And there's multiple things that we measure within that, one of which is the quality or the maturity of the data foundation. And I bring it up because as you were making the distinction between reactive and proactive, uh, data trust is not a monolith. Data trust actually depends significantly on, do you trust it for what purpose? And while master and transactional data used for reporting had relatively high levels of trust, about 50%, only 5%, 1 in 20 respondents had a high trust in the data used for interpretations and prescriptions in order to drive their customer experience. So not using it at scale, not having full trust of it to drive predictive actions. And that means that for all of the AI, for all of the ML, all the analytics that you can and may want to have, if at the end of the day people do not trust that underlying data, they're not going to trigger those actions, or they're going to waste a lot of time validating those actions before they trigger them. And now you've wasted a lot of the value from that speed at scale.
Yeah.
Is there any lessons learned, any pitfalls to avoid that you've come across in this process of building sufficient trust in the data as you're moving from reactive to proactive to automated decisions along that journey?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a really common challenge. What you want to avoid is, implementing a new process and creating some tsunami of alerts that your team has to respond to that are really providing no value and are just undermining, their trust and future efforts. So, starting small, and really seeing that data drive outcomes on a small scale and building from there is something we've seen to be really beneficial. So, testing and piloting so that you're not overwhelming the teams with noise, as you mentioned, but that you're building that trust gradually. One of the ways we did that was in a situation where we started out with the more predictive alerts in a separate queue to be managed before we rolled it out into the production process. And one of the areas we began with was paper jams. It's a good example here. So you can imagine in the print world, paper jams, they happen, right? You don't need to dispatch a technician every time a printer has a paper jam. We would never get anything done. That said, there's a sensitivity and a tolerance from a customer in terms of how frequently that can happen before they become frustrated and before it does become a service issue or a customer satisfaction issue. But there's a sensitivity there that you have to measure and you have to understand within the data. Is it 5 paper jams in an hour? Is it 10? Is it 15? At what point does that start to drive the need to reach out proactively or predictively about an issue? So getting that tuned in just right before you roll it out into a massive business process at scale is really important. And so that's one of the ways we did it, was having that in a separate queue managed by a few agents, or maybe even for only a few customers while you're testing it out. And then you land on that sweet spot of what it looks like to trigger at the right time before you roll that out more broadly. And Dexis, one of our customers on the Optra platform, also took that same approach. They started with one product family, one use case, where they wanted to see those predictive service outcomes being achieved so that they could prove that trust in the data before they rolled it out to additional product families, which they have done since. So it's really that starting small, piloting, making sure that you've got things dialed in, and then turning it on to achieve the bigger results at scale.
Yeah, great examples again. And one of the things I want to call out, which is sort of implicit in the story that you were telling, but it's right sizing the
Mhm.
data that you're putting out there,
Mhm.
correct? Because in order to build that trust, one of the things that we are seeing right now in our Voice of the Field Service Engineer study, which is in market, and this has been trending, is technicians feeling overwhelmed by the volume of data that they're receiving. And it
Mhm.
could be valuable data, but it's so much that it even makes the important data that they need at the moment hard to find. And that
Mhm.
takes time and leads to frustration. The same thing happens to anybody in the organization that is trying to leverage this intelligence that we're talking about. So knowing how to triage that intelligence, if you'll allow the term, I think it's a huge value in the story that you were saying. So that you can focus, that you know that it's valuable and that it's actionable enough. You're not just chasing the wind
Mhm.
all of the time. And it would be a shame on me moment if, as we're talking through data foundation, if we don't explicitly call out IoT data.
Mm.
So it's perhaps the class of data that is most talked about and yet less utilized at scale. There's been a promise to its value for years, and we continue to see it as a gap across the service chain. Our state of service supply chain this year, 54% said they had no or low use of IoT data for their planning activities. State of remote support and self troubleshooting, 38% said that the inability to use IoT at scale was limiting their accurate diagnosis of service events and therefore the experience that it was driving. Similar story we could talk about from field service operations. So, what are some of the best practices, success stories that you've observed across service organizations to change this dynamic around IoT data specifically? Because I do fear that at some point it could, and not too far away from now, deteriorate into cynicism and
Mm.
become the, oh yeah, IoT data. Like
Mm.
it's everybody talks about it, it's gonna take me nowhere. I I think the opposite is true. It's extremely powerful. But what have we learned? What type of outcomes has it perhaps delivered to some of your partners, some of your customers, the field technicians that help us the different parts of the supply chain?
Yeah. One thing I will say is that, it's hard to talk about IoT data in a vacuum, just in a alone. One of the important things that we have found where the magic happens is combining that IoT data with other business system data, that other critical data in the organization that gives it context. So not just the IoT data alone, but combining it with service history data or case data, usage pattern data, sales data, even from your CRM and your ERP systems to really bring context to that data and help to drive those outcomes. So, for example, having just the temperature of the device or the vibration doesn't make much sense if you don't also have the location of the device, which customer is using that device, what does that usage look like, and then maybe what's your service level agreement with that customer, right? How quickly do you need to respond, and what priority level does that drive depending on where that device fits into their own ecosystem. So really bringing context to that data. And that's one of the things that we have done in our Optra platform for our own business and for other customers is, integrate data from all of those sources together to really drive visibility into the challenges that are being faced. So utilizing the signals from the IoT data, along with seeing when that drives service case creation, helps to figure
Mm-hmm.
out, as I mentioned earlier, some of that, sensitivity from customers and some of that real usage out in the field and how it's impacting your technology. So, the benefit that brings then is you're driving outcomes for service, potentially, but not just for service, potentially for sales, potentially for your R&D and engineering teams and figuring out how to build better products. so that they don't experience the issues out in the field. So I think all of this, can drive outcomes for not just your service teams, but for, obviously it does help your help desk efficiency and your field service efficiency, shifting left to that customer self-service, but even potentially shifting further left back to R&D and engineering to help drive better products, with the ultimate goal of just, being able to please your customers, delight them, and have them, thrilled that your devices just aren't failing. So, that's something we would all love to achieve.
Yeah, I'm very aligned to what you said about cannot be looked at in a vacuum, and illustrated it. A lot of the value that we see following this philosophy, it applies if we try to solve remote support without understanding the implications on field service, on the supply chain. That value is going to be limited. We see it in the maturity index. If you build a data foundation without having the capabilities, so that connection, it goes back to our starting point today of imperfect data. Imperfect data is okay, but one of the key takeaways that I'm getting from your examples is perhaps focusing on what are the connections that really matter within that imperfect data, and that's going to help you, especially at the start. And the next step to start building on that is, would those connections reveal something new? Because a lot of the things that we've been talking about is when you have a clear purpose in mind, you get better data, better connections of data, and you do what you're doing better. There's also the argument of, well, I realized something that I didn't know, or the discovery of that you don't know what you don't know. Do you have any anecdotal evidence of this, where the process of going through cleaning up the data, trying to leverage it, led to unintended positive consequences, new opportunities?
Absolutely. Absolutely. One specific example comes to mind. Now I mentioned, one of our customers that started down a predictive service journey. And so, obviously when you get started on an initiative like this, you have some outcomes in mind. You need to, right? You're driving towards a business case or an ROI. So there needs to be some clear goals that you're trying to achieve. And those need to be business outcomes. Like, what are the things that matter to your business? For us, one of the top ones I mentioned earlier was supplies fulfillment. Service could be the one for your organization. There could be others, but really pinpointing on what outcomes are you trying to achieve. But our one customer that started down that predictive service journey, they had a realization. So once they started getting the IoT data and building that into that business process to trigger those service actions, they realized, well, wait, I'm getting IoT alerts from devices that are no longer under warranty. So rather than simply discarding those alerts, their thought process was, well, this is a great sales opportunity. So rather than just ignore them, they turned those alerts in an automated fashion into sales leads for their inside sales team to go try to sell extended warranty, or look at the age of that device and determine whether a device replacement was needed. So it was a net new revenue generating activity that simply came from trying to make the service process better. And in the process, they've generated, just on their first product family, over $600,000 of new warranty revenue directly from that process. So now, again, as they expand that out to other product families and find other opportunities with the data, then that can just exponentially increase. So that was a really cool story that we found with them, and just love to see that benefit. Their service leader shared with me, she said, now that we're getting the data, there's just so many things we see, so many opportunities, what else can we find, so they're really excited about seeing what other opportunities they can mine from that data now that they have it.
Yeah, and a very timely story. So service leaders agenda this year, cost reduction efforts, they tend to be a constant within service. But this year in particular, we've seen that the targets for service revenue, the targets for profit margin from service are elevating for more than half of service leaders. So there is that focus on how can it become more of a P&L? Where can we find new opportunities, new ways of expanding the business? So I'm sure many of our audience will relate to this point. On that thing, one last quick question, because in these metrics, many are still in the using lagging indicators over leading indicators to try to catch up with the business. And I mean, the metrics at the end of the day, it is part of that whole building trust, having governance of your process, being able to do a storytelling about the improvements that you're achieving. Any thoughts on, do KPIs need to evolve or adapt in order to reflect this more predictive mindset in service delivery? What is your stand on that?
Absolutely. In our own business, the Lexmark business, we have seen, in the past focus from our side on those traditional KPIs of, first time fix or mean time to repair, SLA compliance. Those are really focused on things that have already happened, right? And you're trying to recover from it. What we've had to do in our business as we've developed this predictive capability, we've had to shift our customers' mindsets too, from, focusing on things like on-site response and restore metrics to uptime and availability, right? Being able to keep the device up and running. So let's think more proactively. And for ourselves, we're now monitoring things like how many alerts were created proactively and predictively versus reactively, shifting that balance and that ratio. Forecasting consumables and wear parts, like we've talked about, to get ahead of those needs versus having a device go down. Looking at making a further mean time between failures, so stretching out the time between issues and making sure that customers aren't experiencing as many issues. And this not only, improves your customer experience and hopefully loyalty, but can also open up additional opportunities for new business models and revenue opportunities, like you just mentioned, additional, focusing on those availability metrics or premium service offerings, or even as a service type service models if you've got the data to support those. So, it does open up a lot more opportunities, but it's a shift in the customer mindset as well as the internal mindset for sure.
Yeah, that's so I gotta tell you, Alice, you delivered so much value to the community by helping one translate this concept of predictive and proactive into something that is feasible, doable. Did it at the Service Journey Day. Was a great event by any measure, and the examples that you've shared today are really relevant for our audience, especially in particular those that are going to be joining us in Chicago. We have September 8th to attend our biggest event of the year, our Smarter Services Executive Symposium. And it's a fantastic agenda this year. I'll let you consume that on your own online, but I will say that Alice and Lexmark at large will be part of that. They'll be having a breakout session with one of these customer stories on optimizing proactively triggered service events to increase margins, like the situation that we were just talking about. And I'm sure we could go another 40 minutes on that right now, but I do gotta let you go and do some of your day job. Before I do that, we've learned so much about what you're doing and how you're adding value from a work perspective. Is there anything that you can share, perhaps about a passion of yours outside of work, something that you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. Outside of work, one of my passions is community involvement, and I'm pretty involved in the community here in Lexington, Kentucky, with several nonprofits. One of those is called the International Book Project, where I'm the president of the board. And IBP has been around since about 1966. Started here in Lexington, and our mission is to promote literacy and increase opportunities in communities in Kentucky, the U.S., and around the world. And we do that by shipping boxes, pallets, even containers of books to agencies, schools, libraries all around the world that need books. So I've loved to read since I was a kid. I'm an avid reader, and it brings me a lot of joy to be able to play a part in putting books in the hands of kids and folks that need them, don't have access to them, to be able to further their education and increase opportunities and cultural awareness. So it's a really fun organization.
That's a fantastic initiative. Thank you for sharing that, Alice. And if somebody's interested in that, also now know where you can follow up and get some guidance. So thank you so much for having me here. Thank you to our listening audience. As usual, today's session was recorded and will be soon available everywhere you listen to your podcast, including our website and our LinkedIn channels. Looking forward to see you in our next edition, and see you hopefully as well in Chicago for our Smarter Services Executive Symposium this year. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.